Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and today I have a deck tech for the 17th Division, a new Finnish division from the Men of Steel DLC that came out recently. This is an interesting division based heavily around a strong artillery tab in order to make way for an air tab that will carry it through the game, as it otherwise is often lacking a lot of AT or tanks in order to cover and make advances like many other divisions do. It is in many ways similar to that of the other Finnish division, the other Finnish infantry division, which is the Raimna Rapana, although I will say that this still does have some unique differences, being more artillery focused and a little less on air alongside some other small changes. Regardless, let's go ahead and just jump right into talking about the different tabs. Starting in Recon, not a lot of decisions here. I just take the double sniper teams in Phase A and B. Honestly, not a whole lot to say. You could take these Kevos units if you wanted to for like some bulky recon units with an AT weapon, but it's kind of whatever. I like the sniper teams more. Then we get to the interesting infantry tab. There's actually several ways to build this, and it kind of comes down to your personal preference. But the way I have it set it up is that I'm starting off with a card of these disheartened uh, prick Prikatelinen units. These units are disheartened, and they are essentially just Kavari, but disheartened, and 15 points. They have high availability. They can't be vetted up. They're essentially just spam units. We're going to spam these out to fill out the lines, which is honestly quite nice. They complement our other infantry quite well because they still do put out a decent bit of damage and can even do a bit of work in CQC because they have 3 Samoys. They're not exactly amazing in this role, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but still, they're nice, and they help to bulk out our infantry numbers quite well. Then I have our soul card of Jakari in Phase A. Now, Jakari is something we should talk about because previously, these guys were fantastic. A premier unit that often was very powerful in CQC. However, this has changed with Men of Steel. The introduction of the shock trait has really changed up how CQC works, and Jakari have been pretty soundly dethroned from their high position in terms of the CQC capabilities. They do have an extra Samoy, and they still do have their Molotovs, so they're effective in that regard, but they need to be paired with something else now. You can't just have these guys like dealing with most units. They can win against like say a Panzer Grenadier or something that shouldn't be so close to them, but otherwise they're not really going to be able to beat any dedicated CQC units, unlike before where they at least kind of had a chance. They get soundly defeated now. So make sure to pair them up and use those Molotovs alongside a better unit for CQC. We have the Kavari leader. Not a whole lot to say. I just take the one with the Panzerfaust. You could take the one with the smoke if you wanted to. They also have radio, which is nice to have for this division. Then we have our interesting Sextitan infantry. These guys are essentially really, really solid. And that is because they are just Kavari that have a better light machine gun, a better AT weapon, and are fanatical for practically no downside. The Kavari do have a higher availability, but these still have the standard infantry availability, and they come with at least one level of veterancy. They're just overall very solid. Not a whole lot wrong with them. They're our main line unit. Then we also have this Sextitan Assault Squad. It has Shock and Fanatical, 7 Samoys, 2 automatic rifles, and a explosive. Premier CQC unit. Probably one of the most appealing options out of this entire infantry tab. Fantastic. They pair extremely well with the Jakari, and these guys are a force to be reckoned with no matter who they are facing down. Just absolutely fantastic. In Phase B, we have another card of our Disheartened Infantry, another card of Sextitans, and another card of these Assault Infantry. Just filling out our numbers, CQC, filler, and some line units. Then in Phase C, I'm capping it off with a single card of the Kavari, just the regular ones. The reason for this is for availability. The Sextitans only have 18 in Phase C, so if you take them there, you have a bit of an issue where you kind of lack the numbers that normally a C card offers. The Kavari kind of fixes that, so that's why I'm taking them. Solid overall, not a whole lot to say, but that is why I've chosen to do that. In terms of other units, we really only have two options to talk about, these Junta and these Pioneeri, which are both engineer units. One has an AT rifle, another one has an AT grenade. Honestly, they just don't measure up to the power that is this fanatical CQC unit. These guys are just so much better than the explosive units that it's like not even funny. And there's just really not a reason to take these guys. Then we move on to the tank tab. We have two cards in the tank tab, and they're pretty simple. A card of T26s and a card of Stug 3s. The T26 is a relatively slow tank, but provides decent infantry support, kills lightly armored vehicles, and even kinda sorta kill medium tanks if you somehow get like a side shot on them. But that's not reliable. Don't count on that. But, you know, infantry support, and we'll take any armor we can get, as this is pretty much our only light armored vehicle. And then we have 4 Stugs. Not a whole lot to say. The Stug is a very solid tank overall. Good at brawling with medium tanks, and just overall very, very reliable. And in this division, we'll take them because these are the only medium tanks we get, and they help to fill out our otherwise somewhat lackluster AT. In the support tab, we have a disheartened Maxim as our machine gun of choice. The reason for this is that it's the cheapest option, and it comes in the Kubel wagon. Being disheartened is not exactly great, but we don't really have any other options if we want a machine gun. Then we have the BT-42. The BT-42 is a fantastic little tank, great at indirect fire, has the ability to either shell stuff with its indirect fire now, or direct fire with things like its incendiary rounds. Very reliable, very, very good. We're taking both cards. It's a very useful unit to support our infantry with. We have a commander unit, not a whole lot to say, it's just kind of your basic commander. We're taking these military police. These guys are there because we have a total of almost 40 squads of disheartened infantry. So these squads, for only 15 points, help to fill out our numbers and just help us to maintain it. If a military police is around any of our disheartened squads, they just turn into Kavari, which is really good. That's like actually really, really nice because Kavari are not bad infantry, and getting them for 5 points left and in greater numbers is just really, really good. So these guys actually do kind of serve a purpose in this division. Then finally we have a Ford AA truck, just supply truck, not a whole lot to say about it. In terms of our other options, not a whole lot. We could take these fanatical Maxims, but Fanatic does nothing on machine guns because machine guns can't shoot under 100 meters. So Fanatics essentially, like, sure, the machine gun won't get killed or like won't surrender, but it's probably dead if it's fighting in such a close area. And on top of that, it costs 5 more points than this one, and Maxims still suck no matter how you cut it. So better to just kind of have the cheaper option, or even one that's more numerous, than one that is more expensive for something that doesn't matter. Moving on to anti-tank, we have a lot of infantry options and a couple options for cards of AT guns. Starting out, I have this disheartened Panzerschreck. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's just essentially the cheapest Panzerschreck unit we have. Reliable, high stealth. Disheartened doesn't matter much because these should be getting ambush shots and just killing on their first hit. Just good overall. We have these Lati anti-tank teams, 2 anti-tank rifles, and smoke. I'm taking the fanatical version because why not? Good at rushing to the front line and sniping enemy transports. Also helps to deal with like half-tracks and armored cars a bit. Just okay overall. You know, we have the room to put them in there, so why not? Then we have this 45mm AT gun. Not exactly the greatest gun in the world, but light AT guns are useful to stop armored car rushes, and they can contribute to killing uh, even up to medium tanks if they get like side shots or whatnot. So nice to have, never can really complain about it. Then we have a card of Pack 40s. I'm taking it in A, and I will explain why in a minute as we talk about some of the other tabs. But regardless to say, Pack 40 is really, really good. They have high range, high penetration. If you've played any Axis division that has a Pack 40, you understand why these are good and why you should take them. Then we also round it out with a card in Phase B of these bulky Panzerschreck teams. 10-man fanatical Panzerschreck teams. The reason I'm taking these guys is that they are just durable, and that helps to keep them alive, which is useful because we don't really have room to run any more AT. So it's useful to have some Panzerschrecks always kicking around in, say, towns or forests where we really need them, and they're not easily killed either. These other units, all for the most part, are just like the same thing. Like, for example, these two, you have like the fanatical version and the regular version of most units. You do have this basic Panzerschreck team. If you wanted to, you could take them in place of the larger unit. It is cheaper and they have higher stealth, but they're only 2-man. It's up to you, but otherwise, not a whole lot to talk about here. Moving on to anti-air, we have a bit of an interesting tab. Starting off, we have these dual 20mm Vekotin AA guns. Overall, these are our main anti-air pieces. Reliable overall, with numerous 20mm, they're actually somewhat reliable at damaging and scaring planes off, and on top of that, they can even be a little effective at killing stuff because they put down so much AA at once. So it's overall a solid anti-air piece. We're taking a vet because we have the ability to, and then we're taking a card of them in B. But then in Phase B, we also have 2 cards of these Vickers 75. And why are we doing this? Well, because these aren't anti-air pieces, they are AT guns hiding in the anti-air tab. That's right, we're going to mostly be using these as essentially Pack 40s. If you compare the two guns side by side, they are essentially the same thing. The Pack 40 has 1,750 meters range and 145 millimeters of penetration. The Vickers does as well. So this is what we're going to mainly be using them for. Now, granted, they are quite a bit more expensive, and that is a bit of a downside, but they do also have the dual purpose. They have a lot of HE to shoot at infantry, and they can also still act as anti-air. So they're very, very flexible, and having 8 of them means that throughout the game, we won't ever be spare or ever be sore for AT, alongside having just plenty of anti-air alongside it. It's a good combination. And you could even, in theory, push one of these to Phase C if you're really going for the long game. But Phase B, 8 of them, that's usually enough. A lot of divisions get by with a card of Phase B of 2 cards of packs, 1 in A, 1 in B. So we should get by with this in tow. Then for the other options, you do have Bofors if you wanted to go for a more standard anti-air approach. But I like the dual 20mm because it's not only cheaper to put up, which is useful because we're buying a lot of artillery, but because they're also, I find, a little more reliable at shooting planes down. But you could go with the Bofors, nothing wrong with it, but don't take these trucks, they both suck. Now we move on to the artillery tab. This is very filled with a lot of options, and this looks like a ton of artillery that I'm taking, and I'll explain why it's like this in a minute. Let's go over my choices. So starting off, we have these 83.8mm howitzers. These are overall decent little howitzers. They have a nice little punch to them with their artillery. They have smoke, and they even have AP shells if they wanted to be emergency AT. They're just flexible overall. Honestly, not a whole lot to say about them, but they do get improved by our artillery leader, which is important, and they can add weight of numbers to our artillery section. Then we also have the 122mm artillery piece. Similar to the Vickers in the anti-air tab, These guys are essentially AT guns hiding in plain sight. What we're doing is we are essentially using their heat shells and rolling them up to the front line to act as additional AT tools. They also still can act as regular artillery, and they do have a decent punch to them, but really these heat shells are very, very useful. They deal with pretty much anything up to and including panthers and tigers, alongside being able to direct fire at infantry and be very effective. It's a very solid artillery piece, and overall is very nice. And if we do use them as artillery, then the artillery leader turns them into actually pretty solid artillery. In fact, they're so nice that I've taken a card in Phase B as well. This is, again, to bolster our AT options. We now have not only 2 cards of Vickers, but a card of this 122mm to serve as AT. Then, beyond that, we have this 155mm artillery piece. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one. They are quite expensive at over 100 points. They only fire HE, they have a low rate of fire, and in-game they have a pretty bad dispersion rate, meaning they're low accuracy. So what are they good for? Well, pretty much numbers. They have an incredible availability curve going 4, 6, 8 in the tabs. By taking them in Phase B, we can always make sure they're going to be paired up with our artillery leaders in order to help deal with this. Because, for those that don't know, artillery leaders got a very big change in the update. And that is that these units now provide 2 things to artillery howitzers in their radius. One, units get radio if they don't have it, which is already very nice. But 2, the bigger thing is that all howitzers in the radius of an artillery leader gets a 25% reduction in their dispersion. Essentially, they get boosted, their accuracy goes up by 25%. So this means that inaccurate things like this that otherwise would kind of suck kind of sort of turn into more usable artillery pieces. They get a higher fire rate also from being next to a leader, so these turn from probably kind of bad into tolerable, and they just have numbers to back themselves up. You're never going to run out of artillery set up like this, and this is what makes them nice. Not only that, they also have a decent amount of ammo and have a lot of damage on them. Then we have the 150mm artillery piece. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's just the German 150mm. Overall, it's very solid. I use these mostly as counter battery troops. They're the most accurate heavy artillery we have, and especially next to an artillery leader, and I use them as counter barrage, which they do a good job at. They're able to generally be the counter barrage while my crappier, cheaper artillery fires at enemy units in mass. Then the final card I'm taking is this big old 203mm howitzer. These things pack a hell of a punch, and they don't have a lot of ammo, so I'm taking them with supply trucks. But they provide us with the biggest of booms when we need so. Talking about the other options really quickly, if you don't like these 83mm, you could consider taking these ZIS 3 style AT or howitzers. They have less HE, but they do have AP shells, and they have a 105 penetration, so actually enough to kill like medium tanks. They're pretty solid. I actually had them in here until recently, but I ended up kind of settling on a different setup. But you could very easily slot these in. Mortars, I don't think you need mortars really. You have other options. This 105mm, the German LEFH just sucks. Don't use it. Even with artillery leaders. You have a 120mm mortar, don't need mortars. You have another card of these 122mm. Could be an interesting option if you wanted to spam them. If you didn't like this 155, another card of these could never hurt. You have multiple cards of the 150mm, which could be good. You know, it's very possible that if you don't like these 155 low-tier artillery pieces, another card of German SFH 18s is always solid. And then finally, you have these Soviet 152mm artillery pieces. Very similar in comparison to the German artillery piece. Same availability curve. They have radio, yada, yada, yada. This one has smoke, and I find is just a little bit more reliable, but this technically packs a bigger punch. Kinda up to you. Then to round things off, our air tab. So starting off, we have this Blenheim bomber. You get a high availability of them. They have a decent payload. They're overall just reliable artillery or AA, or they're reliable bombers. We also have this cluster Stuka, crucial anti-tank. These are how you're going to bust up a lot of those big bad tanks that you otherwise would struggle to deal with. We have the BF 109 G6R2. Essentially, it's just a BF 109, but with a couple bombs strapped to it. It's ever so slightly slower, but has extra utility. That's why I've opted to take it. We have the DBF, or the DB3F, relatively low speed, but high resilience. It has a nice big payload in it. These are just good overall, pairs well with your artillery once the artillery has dealt with the anti-air. And then finally, the Focke-Wulf 190 F8, a solid overall AT plane. The AT rockets are good enough to deal with targets. They're also just Focke-Wulfs, so you kind of have like extra fighters if you need them. But their resilience and speed means that they generally can get in and out and deal with the targets you need them to. Your other options are some recon planes, which I couldn't find room for. The basic fighter, if you didn't like the fighter bomber, you could just take these. And then these Ju-88s, which aren't bad, but I like the higher availability of the DB instead. So that is the deck tech. Interesting division overall. It's definitely very artillery spam heavy, and is honestly really suited for like team games. 1v1 is a bit more complicated, and if you were to do a 1v1 with this deck, you might want to consider switching to a Maverick costing style and then kind of changing up the artillery roster. But overall, I think it's pretty cool how this division kind of has to find AT outside of the AT tab. I like that it has a good, interesting mix of infantry. Just overall quite fun. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Do you like this division? What is your thoughts on this Finnish division or on the Men of Steel DLC in general? Otherwise, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.